Wait. The which fleet is going to do the operation? The U.S. Ninth Fleet. Do they have a Ninth Fleet? No, they don't. That's the beauty of it. Oh, no, I see. It's a Phantom Fleet, yeah? Yeah, nice. Yeah, all right. Okay, bye. April 22nd, 1944. Japan invaded India last month, and though it was a decent-sized invasion force, it had only limited goals. This week, though, the Japanese launched something designed to be far larger. A massive, sprawling, multi-stage operation in China, the largest offensive the Japanese have ever launched, Ichigo. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviets began attacks to take back the Crimea, while continuing their attacks into Romania and on the Dniester. The Japanese have the Allies under siege at Kohima in India, but in Burma, their siege of Merrill's marauders ended. However, that is small potatoes in size to the huge offensive in China they were preparing to launch, which again is launched this week. On the 17th, Operation Ichigo begins. The first phase is the Battle of Central Henan, the Kaikan Offensive. Japan is sending 12th Corps from the North China Area Army and a bit of 1st Corps to destroy the enemy along the southern Peking-Hankow Railway and near Luoyang, while a brigade from 11th Corps will advance north along the railway from the south, ideally linking up and clearing the whole railway of Chinese. This offensive is a big surprise to everyone, but especially to Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek. He's been preoccupied with Burma. See, the current Japanese offensive towards Imphal surprised the Allied powers with its scale, and both General Stilwell and General Mountbatten urged Chiang to throw in his Yunnan forces in coordination with the attack of the Chinese army in India. But Britain's refusal to honor the commitment of a sizable naval presence in southern Burma led him to refuse to send more troops to North Burma. Chiang strengthened his case by citing fears of a possible Japanese offensive in China, but his diaries suggest that he consistently underestimated Japanese intention and capability. Instead, he was so optimistic as to propose other actions to his generals in the Chinese theater. In early April, he thought Japan had transferred its China theater troops to the India-Burma region, and that it was an opportune time for the Chinese to launch an offensive. Actually, even now, after the attacks have begun, he does not think Japan can bring more than several divisions to bear in China. Japan has, in fact, mobilized forces from occupied Manchukuo, from those fighting the communist guerrillas, and from all over China, really. Their overall plan is to first cut the Yellow River and the occupied part of China into north and central zones. With all the reinforcements from the north, the Japanese want to take Hunan province, especially the valley and the Shang River Railroad, and then eventually bring up forces from the south and Indochina and occupy Guangxi province, particularly the railroad through its north. I talked about the seizing of railroads and air bases and the reasoning for it last week. Now, in March, the Japanese started repairing the Yellow River Bridge near Zhangzhou, but Chiang thought that was for a withdrawal by the Japanese army in Wuhan, and the best counter to that was simply a bombing campaign. Chiang thought it would take the Japanese more than 2 months to complete the reconstruction of the Iron Bridge, which meant he had plenty of time to request aid from the American Air Forces in China. Even if the American Air Force could not come in time, he thought his army was capable of delaying the Japanese offensive and in the meantime launching a counteroffensive in the Three Gorges area in the middle Yangtze to harass the Japanese army that began a retreat from Wuhan. Well, the Japanese forced the Yellow River the 17th, and already the 18th, they've destroyed a heavily fortified nationalist position with bunkers and anti-tank traps and everything. It's not really until the 19th that Chiang begins to take this more seriously. He thinks the Japanese will attack south along the Peking-Wuhan Railroad, and in his journal today, the 22nd, he actually calls this offensive a stupid move. He's got Tang Enbo's Henan army, and he anticipates them winning a great victory on the plains west of Xuchang Walled City, which is also a big railway junction. The Allies are launching new operations of their own against the Japanese, though. Okay, on the 21st, to prepare for landings on New Guinea, Mark Mishra leads Task Force 58 with 12 carriers in attacks on Hollandia, Wakti Island, Sawar, and Sarai. Today, on the 22nd, Operation Reckless and Operation Persecution go into action. These are landings at Hollandia and Aitape and are to cut off the Japanese at Wewak. Robert Eichelberger and U.S. First Corps provide the ground forces. The naval force is some 200 ships of Task Force 77 under Daniel Barbie, backed by 2 bombardment forces of British, Australian, and American cruisers. There are 84,000 men doing this, of which 52,000 are combat forces. Hatazo Adachi has like 11,000 Japanese defending here. 1 regiment lands down the coast at Aitape, a division at Tanamera Bay, and another division at Humboldt Bay. The Japanese are taken by surprise and retire inland, leaving just enough forces to harass the newcomers. So there's fairly little resistance, and the landings are well established. There are problems, however, with the local terrain. There is swampy ground behind the narrow beaches at Tanamera. There are no roads, which they thought there would be, so the engineers have their work cut out for them. In fact, though the infantry from 24th Division do push on inland, the rest of the division is rerouted to Humboldt Bay, where the 41st has landed. They have secured the beach there, and this day land 300 vehicles, but engineers with bulldozers have to work hard to clear the only beach exit and make a roadway. This is not the only new Allied operation in action. The U.S. has begun plans for Operation Wedlock against Japan's Kuril Islands to the northeast of Sapporo. Much like Operation Fortitude over in Europe, which I've talked about a few times, this is a deception plan, which will hopefully lead the Japanese to divert resources there and away from where the actual target operations are being planned to hit, the Marianas Islands. Operation Wedlock involved a fictional force of American and Canadian troops, complete with their own supplies, signals, and string posts, as well as giving the actual staging post in Hawaii the appearance of an integral part of the Kuril Island attack. A largely phantom Ninth Fleet was also created and began sending and receiving messages from the very real 3rd and 5th Fleets, as well as carrying out entirely fictitious practice maneuvers. To add to the credibility of the deception, American bombers were instructed to bomb Japanese military, air, and naval installations on the Kuril Islands every day, weather permitting. Well, if there are fictitious American attacks to come at the northeastern edge of Japan's empire, there are very real British ones at the western edge this week. Last week, the Japanese were defeated at Nungshigum, mainly by British armor scaling both its peaks, which the Japanese had not thought possible. So Masafumi Yamauchi has his 15th Division dig in around Sengmai and Kanglatongbi to hold on to the Kohima-Imphal road. Under strength to begin with, Yamauchi's men had then lost heavily at Nungshigum, while the survivors faced starvation as Mutaguchi's promised rations failed to arrive. To cap it all, as Yamauchi admitted, his men simply had no answer to the British attacks, for traveling through the jungle lightly to strike at Imphal had precluded the taking of effective anti-tank weapons. I jumped the gun a bit on the starvation thing. That's a couple of weeks down the line here if things continue as they are. But they are well dug in now enough that 1,000 bombs dropped on their bunkers by the RAF does not do that much damage at all. However, while they're dug in there, 23rd Indian Division is clearing out the Ukhrul and Iris Valley roads in their rear and setting up roadblocks. On the Tamu road front, Doug Gracie's 20th Indian Division finally knocks the Japanese off Nippon Hill after nearly 3 weeks of trying. They managed to do this with the help of heavy airstrikes, but they take big casualties themselves. He therefore decided to retire into an even tighter defensive perimeter, deeming that possession of the Tamu road was an irrelevance until the struggle for the ridge was resolved. He contented himself with holding the most important heights and all the passes that lead to Palel and the Imphal Plain. The war in this sector bogged down into a kind of rerun of the Western Front in World War I, with both sides dug in behind bunkers and trenches, fierce attacks taking place every night, and the stench of death everywhere as the corpses piled high in such a restricted area. Fighting begins the 21st for the summit the British call Crete West. Now, coming from this front, the Japanese under Tsunoru Yamamoto do have armor and artillery, and they've been just trying to blast their way up the road all month. The night of the 19th, they make 3 separate attacks using medium tanks, but all are repulsed. But today, the 22nd, they overrun part of the British positions. As for the siege of Kohima to the north, which has been the scene of desperate fighting since the first week of April, well, that does not change this week. Each morning, after the combat of the night before, bloated bodies lie in the open, covered in blankets of flies. The Allied defenders are fighting from the same trenches in which they perform all bodily functions. And by early this week, the Japanese have cut the besieged in 2, and it seems like it might be all over. But literally, just in the nick of time. On the 16th, 5th Brigade from 2nd Division finally enters the scene to relieve Jotsoma, which means the 161st Brigade can advance and relieve Kohima, opening the road. The Japanese, of course, fight back against this threat, but they're now not only suddenly really outnumbered, they're also actually starving, and on the 20th, they are forced to lift the siege. Montague Stopford's 33rd Corps has, in fact, 4 fresh brigades to throw against them, and they have no reinforcements, and no armor, no planes, and they're even starting to run out of ammunition. Still, the siege of Kohima might be over, but the battle sure isn't. The Allies are going to have to take back all the territory lost, inch by bloody inch. Now, don't get me wrong, Kotoku Sato wants to pull back. He does. But Renya Muraguchi, who designed this whole operation, will not let him. And so his men are dug in pretty well in positions some 7 kilometers long on Kohima Ridge. And in the Crimea, some other Axis forces are dug in to defend positions they too do not want to defend. On the 16th, the Soviets take Yalta. On the 18th, they take Balaclava and begin operations in the outskirts of Sevastopol. Adolf Hitler tells Army Group South Ukraine to take away any personnel and equipment not needed to defend Sevastopol, but again insists that the city be held. Casualties in the first 10 days numbered 13,131 Germans and 17,653 Romanians. The ration strength of 17th Army stood at 75,546 Germans and 45,887 Romanians. The Army estimated its combat strength at 1/3 of the German troops. The Romanians, it reported, were not fit for combat and ought to be evacuated. It had, therefore, altogether, 5 Kampfgruppen of approximately regimental strength facing 3 Soviet armies with a combined total of 27 divisions and 200 tanks. So, on the 21st, Army Group Commander Ferdinand Schörner tells Hitler that Sevastopol cannot be held because he just does not have the force. And even if he did, they can't be properly supplied anyhow, with the naval convoys having to fight their way to port. Hitler has answers for this, but, he also did at Stalingrad. Let's see, a statement from a corps commander that if they got a few more troops, they could hold Sevastopol, and a naval report that they can, in fact, keep it supplied. Hitler tells Schörner as well that they only need to hold on for a couple of months max, just long enough to keep Turkey quiet and defeat the Allied invasion in Western Europe. And a couple of days from now, a Black Sea Fleet admiral, when asked by Hitler if he has enough tonnage, says, yeah, but Hitler dismisses him before he can explain that having enough tonnage and actually getting supplies to the Crimea are 2 very different things. Activity along the rest of the Eastern Front starts to really die down. The Soviet supply lines are stretched very thin by all the recent advances, and they need time to plan their next moves. The Axis very much welcome the respite. I mentioned Turkey. There is some news from there this week. Well, Adolf Hitler's 55th birthday is this week on the 20th, and as an unwelcome birthday present, the Turkish government declares it will no longer send chrome to Germany. Turkey has been neutral so far this war, but announces that they are now a pro-Allied nation, though not a belligerent. Germany has enough chrome on hand for maybe 18 months more production of the high-grade steel that they need for tanks. Hitler is actually thinking of tanks, well, panzers, on his birthday, for he sees a demonstration of new models that day at Klesheim Castle. He has hopes that they, and even better models, will stop the Soviet advance and any cross-channel attack. Interestingly enough, also on the 20th, busy day, the Reich Security Main Office issues a report from the Reich, which specifically says that developments in the East and the continually deferred hope of a saving miracle are gradually producing signs of weariness among the people. Also on April 20th, Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, begins journeys of inspection around occupied France. His itinerary is top secret, which means the Allies have intercepted it through ultra-intelligence. His trip will give the Allies a clearer picture of where the German armor in France actually is. Some Allied leaders have grown worried by the increasing number of German divisions in France, but Guderian's journey shows that the actual strength is not insurmountable, nor of the scale needed to cancel or to postpone D-Day. And here is another D-Day related note to end the week. The British government bans all coded radio and telegraph transmissions from London and elsewhere in the British Isles. Diplomatic bags are to be censored, and diplomats are to be forbidden to leave the country. The only exemptions are for the USA and USSR, and, a tribute to their excellent security, the London Poles. The telephone service to Southern Ireland and the distribution of newspapers to there and to Gibraltar have already been stopped on April 5th. These measures are designed to help with the security of the preparations for D-Day. And that brings me to the end of another week of the war. The 243rd. Long time. With Hitler's birthday, Soviet advances in Crimea, the breaking of the siege at Kohima, new landings on New Guinea, and the beginning of a new offensive in China, which by now has Chiang Kai-shek at least starting to worry. I mean, he has big armies, but what kind of shape are they in after all this time? And with the famine of the past couple years, does he still have the support of the local civilians? That's going to be really important. And what will Mao Zedong and the communists do? There are an awful lot of questions, and I will eventually have answers for you, but all I can say right now is that the war has just entered a new chapter. And it will enter another new chapter in June when that Allied cross-channel invasion comes off, assuming it's successful in establishing a foothold in France. We have a whole new channel for that called D-Day 24 Hours. Not just a special, a whole channel, which covers not only the airborne and beach landings, but the global news story, the civilian stories, the politics, the technology involved, the deception plans, the backstory, the everything. A link will come up in a second, and you should go and subscribe to that, so on June 6th, you'll be able to watch all 24 hours of content. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Tony Westbrook. It is the Army that finances all of our content, including D-Day. So go join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com to be a part of this, whatever this is, right? These are the newest officers in the Time Ghost Army. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.